Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. This is Bread Radio, and I'm your host, August Acker, aka Bread. Of course, Bread Radio is a podcast with video games. Thank you so much for joining us today. The date is Thursday, October 22nd, 2020. You can listen to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Recently began uploading episodes to YouTube. Search for Bread Radio. Other housekeeping. The merch is available on breadradio.live. breadradio.live/merch will get you directly there. Got some t-shirts, coffee mugs, what have you. And then if you have any inquiries regarding the show, you'd like to talk about games sometimes, you want to know what my favorite sandwich is, go ahead and email breadradiolive@gmail.com. I think that pretty much gets us through it. It's been a couple weeks. I think last time we spoke, I was talking about updates to the show because we had taken time off during the summer. And man, I'm sorry. I just feel I'm the worst content creator. I feel like the worst content creator. It's not that my motivation never lacks. Well, maybe it is motivation. I don't know. I was thinking about it earlier, and I think that the most impressive thing to me about a lot of like artists in this day and age, I say music, art, podcasters, streamers, whatever else, is their like straight up perseverance, energy. Some days I just don't have all my spoons, man. Like after a full day of work, and I struggle sometimes to get this content out. I think I was speaking about some of that burnout in my last show, but I know that the only way to grow this podcast is to grow anything really is consistency. Whether you're talking about your career, education, or venture something like this, like a podcast, like consistency is key. So I know I'm the worst waffler ever. I'd make a terrible politician, but I'm going to try and be consistent with my content coming out. Again, that'll be on YouTube and wherever you do listen to podcasts. And if you are listening to the show, like thanks for joining me. Let's talk about what's been going down these last couple of weeks. Was recently back home. Had one of my best friends in the world was getting married. I was in the wedding, outdoor wedding, of course, considering the times. It was very responsibly held, all things considered, and it was really great to see my friend like so very happy, and I was really proud to be a part of that experience. So we went there. I selling my old rust bucket Jeep. Getting some work done to it, and I think I have a buyer, so I'm really excited about that because it makes me feel much more comfortable about the PlayStation 5 purchase I'll be making in a few short weeks. Today's show, speaking of that, is about the PlayStation 5. We're going to talk about the PlayStation 5 launch, specs, probably things you've heard, release date, first party title, let's talk about what like day one or like within the launch, what they're calling the launch window. Let's talk about what's coming out on the PS5 and try and like think about it a little bit critically. Like, what does it mean? What do we expect over the next year for Sony and for PlayStation? We're also going to go over some like third-party items that'll be coming out on the games. Talking about first-party studios. They obviously recently released footage of the UI for the PS5. We might talk about some of the extra gear. We'll talk about the future outlook for the system itself, what this next generation could bring, and then we'll talk about what's obviously to come with the show next week. Before we get there, though, let's do my favorite therapy session, I guess, just talking about how things went. When I was writing I have a note here that I just ate the hottest jerky alive because one of my good pals, Subliminal Cheese, if you followed any of my other ventures, you'll probably recognize that name, but saw him when I was back home, and he gave me some of this beef jerky from the business he works at, and I made the mistake of eating the flaming hot beef jerky. I wouldn't say like total mistake, but man, it just about knocked me on my ass. So thanks again, Cheese, for that. I was actually playing on podcasting yesterday. It like threw me off my game. I was like, I don't know if I can do anything. So, thank you again. As I already said, we're going to be resuming the weekly schedule where possible, trying to record on Thursdays and get the show out by Friday. This show, like, I don't know what it is about motivation with me, but like, even when I enjoy something, I have the hardest time just like ramping up. And like, we're talking about working out, we're talking about streaming, we're talking about just like, sometimes as simple as playing a game. I'm like, oh man, like that sounds like a lot right now, which I'm sure is inspiring to you guys to hear me complaining here in my nice bedroom. Well, it's a little bit messy, but complaining about doing something as simple as a hobby. I don't know. This is my show. I'll talk about what I want to. Okay. But anyway, if we think about the date today, October 22nd, 2020, very important election coming up next month. You guys probably know where I stand on the election, barring some older podcasts here on the show. So all I'll say is this. There's been a lot of talk regarding privilege, whether it be based upon sex or gender or race. And I think the one thing I would want to communicate before this election, the one thing that we all share as citizens of this country, regarding privilege, is the right to vote. So some might argue with me with some of the voter suppression methods going on, but hypothetically, we all have the right to vote in this election. So I ask you as citizens, if you're listening in the States, if not, I guess you can ignore me, to go out and vote on election day, November 3rd. Or if you've already gotten an absentee ballot, send that in. Or you can vote early. There's a ton of resources out there. I think a lot of people are getting into vote early, considering the pandemic, which I'm going to try and do this upcoming week. Other items in life. Work has been crazy. I don't think it'll ever not be crazy. The more that I think about it, I feel like every time I'm on the show, like, man, work's crazy, and I guess that's kind of something that's contributed to not having my spoons when it comes time to do some of the creative stuff I want to do. But man, like, I'm very hopeful of like a payoff, not like a payout, but I mean, I've made a lot of progress at my current job, and I'm really I think, everyone's pretty plain when we work there. It's like, hey, this probably won't be your job for the next 10 years, right? So I'm hopeful. For me, my next step after this company is working somewhere in the industry, whether it be esports, whether it be a pipe dream would be Twitch. That would be great, obviously, but esports also. Anything to do with video games, doing project management or something else, where I'm hoping that's the next step. So that's why I'm like pushing so hard in this career, because all the experience I can get is only going to benefit me in the future, because these days businesses require 9 years of experience for an entry-level job. So that's fun. And so from a gaming perspective, I guess what I've been playing recently, it's actually, since I've been around moving around, like seeing my parents and going to that wedding, it's been mostly stuff on my Switch. And a game that if you're listening to this podcast, you probably heard of it. It's called Hades, made by Supergiant Games, of the Bastion, Transistor, and oh man, the last game is eluding me. Or Pyre. Thank goodness I played that at PAX a few years ago. It's a roguelite with heavier story elements than any rogue game I've played. And if all I'll say, because we have a lot of show to get to, and maybe we'll speak about the game in more depth. I haven't done any like deep critical thinking about Hades. Well, I have to some degree, but I don't want to wax on for 30 minutes about it, which I think it deserves. But I'll say is if you're a fan of roguelike or roguelike genres, so I'm talking Dead Cells, Binding of Isaac, I mean, even like Risk of Rain, if you like the element of doing like a run that'll take you like 20 to 40 minutes, and progress, what the thing that's like interesting about this game, or unique about this game in the rogue fashion, is the story beats and the story elements. It's a little more in your face with the story, which I actually like love. The voice acting is amazing in the game. Then this is a game you should definitely be trying. I know it's on PC and Switch right now. I'm not sure where else it is or where else it's coming out, but if you have, look it up. I highly suggest you play it. It's probably my most suggested game recently to anyone that has a Switch. It's perfect to play in handheld mode. I've also been gaming weekly with some of my pals, playing like Valorant, and we've been playing the Master Chief Collection, the like firefight modes. So fun, like the wave-based horde modes. It's been really good to like play game. I mean, this is like, oh wow, this is a very controversial thing I'm saying, but it's just felt really good to like connect with my friends and play games, which, I mean, I don't know, I'm not on trial here, but I feel like we're all sort of aching for some sort of human connection during the pandemic. So like it's really been something, like it kind of just like willed itself in the form that we are playing every Thursday. Like we're actually going to play tonight, and it like drives me through the week. I can't wait to do it, you know? And it's something I've kind of just been missing about just like straight up enjoying games. Like I talked about in the last podcast, like scaling back some of the streams, and I think I'm going to stick to that. I think I'm just going to strictly do podcast and YouTube content and stream like occasionally. But I found out I was so anxious like about my stream quality, the things I'm saying, how good the content is, which I guess I'm doing now, whatever. But like I was not just enjoying playing the games. So it's weird. It's almost lifted a weight off. Like there's no pressure to play something that's like the brand new like state of the art shiny toy. Like we've gone back and played like Overwatch. We might try like some MMO soon. I don't know what yet. All the guys I play with played a ton of WoW. I don't think I'm going to get into WoW anytime soon, but we might try something like that together. Something I talked about in podcasts of past, but Warhammer End Times Vermintide 2. So Vermintide 2, another like kind of horde fantasy game. They've been playing as well, and I look forward to it. There's no message here. It's just great to do again, and I highly suggest if you're looking for I'm sure all of you, again, if you've been listening to this, are playing a ton of games, but man, just like set up something weekly. Like it's nice to have a cadence, some method to the madness, because it's all mad lately, and it's just really nice to have something scheduled, some scheduled good times with buddies. Like I need that, and I think everyone can use that. Anyway, let's get into the business of today's show. The PS5 launch. I have one pre-ordered. I have Spider-Man Miles Morales pre-ordered. I think that's all I have. I originally had a second controller pre-ordered, but I don't think I'm really going to need it yet. I can't remember the last time I actually played something multiplayer on my PS4, because when we have like Nintendo products around, like Mario Kart is the lowest common denominator, or Smash. Like they've really nailed that aspect of their system. I don't know. Let me know if you guys are still playing any split screen games on your PS4 or Xbox these days. But I would guess that most gaming, especially when you're talking about a launch, there's usually not a ton of multiplayer games baked in. One controller should probably be enough for now. Save a few bucks, you know, because we're paying a pretty penny for this thing. It releases obviously November 12th in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Mexico, and South Korea. So some very targeted large markets. And then a week later on November 19th for the rest of the world. It's kind of crazy. It's wild to me that the UK trails also. because I know I'm pretty confident that there's a pretty substantial group of console gamers in the UK, and maybe they don't really have to worry about it because Xbox really is a North American centric sort of product. Xbox doesn't have the foothold worldwide that PlayStation does, unless something changed recently, but in generations past. The specs, I won't begin to lie and tell you I know what all of these numbers mean. I've done my own research on like your tech radars and your digital foundries, and I've watched videos ad nauseum about what we can expect out of the architecture as far as power. But if I were to throw these numbers comparatively, like I wouldn't even begin to, like, we're going to talk about the Xbox launch in our next cast. I will probably do some research before that one so we can compare the specs. But I don't necessarily know the percentage gain. I know that Series X right now is on paper the more powerful console. So we'll see. But it's an AMD Zen 2 based CPU with 8 cores, clocked at 3.5 gigahertz variable frequency. I think the Xbox is opting for a steady frequency. I think the thought for the PS5 is to help manage temperatures and processing. Like, we're going with a variable clock speed. The most interesting thing about the CPU is there's like a liquid metal heat sink, I believe, on the CPU, which is pretty original. And I saw a lot of, or pretty unique, I would say. I saw a lot of conjecture after they like did the hardware tear down about how it works, but I think some people will recall when PS5 news was exceptionally scarce, looking at a patent technical image of a CPU, and that's what this is essentially. And I know there were some people who had questions about the liquid metal like pulling, if it like pulling, POLL. Am I saying that wrong? Pulling? You know when you say a word and it doesn't sound right in your head? That's where I'm at right now. But if you stand the console upright, if there was going to be an issue with that liquid metal pulling, and people who seem to know a lot more than I did indicated that it should not be an issue based upon the what they saw in the hardware breakdown and the patent filing as well. So the GPU is 10.28 teraflops. That new measurement over the past 10 years that's come out that we measure everything by now, teraflops, which I think is slightly less beefy than the one in the Xbox. But they have a custom architecture for the GPU. We're looking at 16 gigs DDR6 RAM, which seems pretty standard. That's why 16 gigs, 8 these days for gaming never seems hardly enough, especially when you're trying to multitask. 32 is overkill. 16 is obviously the sweet spot, and when you're trying to balance performance and price, 16 gigs seems the best place to land. Custom SSD. I know a lot of devs have been, and Sony's been really championing their SSD architecture. The custom nature of it, like being able to load things basically instantly. I'm really excited. I think more than the GPU, more than the processing power, I think the way we store our games will be the biggest jump this generation. So I'm really excited to see how snappy the console is. And then the internal storage is, I think it's a terabyte, but, a ton of that's going to be taken up. Probably at least 100 gigs will be taken up by the OS. It says here internal storage custom 825 gig SSD. So it's probably a terabyte, and then that's what's left over. It's got expandable storage. I know the speed that you need for the expandable storage is still relatively new, so I think that's going to be kind of expensive to start. I don't suspect anyone will need it right away, so I suspect once the console's out in the wild, we'll see much cheaper options roll out, much like when the Switch announced it would have expandable SD cards. We saw Some companies come out with their own versions specifically for Switch that were cheaper than options sold through Nintendo. So, and of course, if you opt for a disc drive like I have, it's got a 4K UHD Blu-ray drive. And I think a lot of people forget back when PS3 first came out, the infamous $599.99 launch price. It was still one of the cheaper Blu-ray. Sony really doubled down on Blu-ray as like the next HD disc format on the PS3 and hit because it was the cheapest Blu-ray out there at the time. Okay, that's great. The hardware seems pretty powerful, albeit a little bit less hefty than Xbox. But if there's one thing I trust Sony on, it's their hardware. That while the PS3 architecture was maybe ahead of its time with what they tried to do, especially when things are cross-platform these days, and the PS4 is very much like PC architecture. They did the same thing for the PS5, of course, because devs are developing, and even Sony these days is releasing things on PC, so it makes sense for them to keep their dev landscapes like similar. But all of that's well and good, but it doesn't mean anything without games. So first, let's go through some of the first-party launch titles, what we're calling the PS5, what they're calling the PS5 launch window. So not everything's day and date of the release, but it's all pretty close to holiday season. Astro's Playroom, which of course is, every new console basically has like a demo style game to show off the features, and that's what Astro's Playroom is. Demon's Souls, the remake. We've got Destruction All-Stars, which I'm actually kind of interested to see. It's that like Rocket League meets Destruction Derby game that was in, I think we talked about it a few months ago at this point when they first did the PS5 reveal. But I'm actually, I don't know, sometimes I want a game I can pick up and play for like 30 minutes and then come back a few months later and do the same thing for like a week or so. It seems like it has those vibes for me, but who knows? Like, so many of those types of games are coming out that, are they going to have a player base? Maybe coming out in the launch window for the PS5, considering like the scarcity of titles, like new titles, exclusive titles. We'll see some maybe not hefty multiplayer numbers, but healthy multiplayer numbers. Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, which incidentally, and we'll talk about later, you can only get it if you order the Ultimate Edition of Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, which is a pretty like ugly way to package it. So you can't, I don't think the original Spider-Man game is going to be backwards compatible from PS4, or it might be backwards compatible, but it won't have the remastered pieces. And you can't buy it separate from Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, but you can get it packaged together in a $60 or $70 package with the Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales Ultimate Edition. Do you follow that? Right. Me neither. But both of those are going to be out in the launch window. I think Spider-Man Miles Morales is day and date. And then Sackboy: A Big Adventure, which is using Sackboy as a Mario platformer equivalent on the PS5. So all in all, first-party launch titles in the launch window, pretty weak. Like, it's clear that they're holding up Spider-Man as like the lead for this new console. Obviously, I expect Demon's Souls to drive a ton of sales as well, because there's a ton of crazy people that love Demon's Souls and love Dark Souls. Sackboy I could see being popular. I'll probably try it, but with the younger generations, if they don't have Nintendos, which I suspect they still do. But I suspect that game will do relatively well. But really, it's kind of a generally weak launch. But again, like, backwards compatibility is a thing on the PS5, which we couldn't say about the last generation of consoles. So it's not like anyone's going to have a scarce library to play. You're just going to be it's I don't know. We're entering the era of diminishing returns. But I feel like with this console release, while I'm excited about it, not like obviously I'm excited about Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man, but we're not quite seeing the same graphical jump. You can only add so many polygons to the picture. I expect to see a ton of improvements in lighting, and as the generation matures, we're going to see someone push the hardware, and we're going to have some wow games. But I mean, it's a relatively light launch, all things considered. Third party though, there is some stuff to get excited about. We've got Bug Snacks, which was a fan favorite during the announcement, with that nice Kero Kero Bonito song. And I watched some of the gameplay on Giant Bomb, and it looks. I loved Octodad, so I'm all in for Bug Snacks. Borderlands 3 is coming from PS4 and Xbox, the last generation, in 4K, 60 FPS. I'm reading off of IGN's list right now. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which I'm actually like pretty pumped to play. I think it actually comes out. It might come out a little sooner than the console does. It's right. It's in that launch window, but it does have a free PS4 upgrade as well. Cyberpunk 2077, that might be the WoW game during launch. Like, now that I'm at, like, there's no WoW game from the first party perspective, but we certainly may see it from the third party side. Say what you will about Assassin's Creed, I actually generally enjoy it. I think sometimes it's wrongly. I think sometimes folks wrongly turn their nose up at Assassin's Creed Valhalla, or Assassin's Creed in general, because it and Far Cry are like the most Ubisoft games out there. Like, they're very much that game, like that blueprint. But they're almost always gorgeous, like, so glitches aside sometimes. Like, the world is gorgeous. I personally loved Odyssey. Obviously I've talked about it a ton here on this cast. I know some of it's empty, some of the side quests are empty, but it was like the perfect pandemic game for me. And considering the pandemic's still going on, I might be playing a second Assassin's Creed during this pandemic with Valhalla. I've actually not watched a ton of content on it because I kind of just want to do what I did with Odyssey and stumble into it. And then of course you've got your yearly Call of Duty, Black Ops Cold War. I haven't played any of the Modern Warfare Battle Royale, but I know that Warzone is going to live across both of those titles. I suspect it's essentially its own platform now. So I don't think I'll buy the new Call of Duty, but I don't know, like the Black Ops story, as far as the storylines go for Call of Duty games, I don't know who plays them for single player anymore. But it's an action film, so maybe it's worth it. It's going to be cross play, cross generation play, with cross progression too. So if you start on PS4 and then upgrade to a PS5, I guess your saves will transfer over. Thing is, it's not a free upgrade. It's actually a $10 upgrade for the PS5 version. What do you expect? Activision's got to get its pound of flesh in it, and ain't gonna give it to you for free. So we also have Devil May Cry 5. I'm actually surprised they're still making Devil May Cry games. Like, that whole hack and slash genre, it's like the Quake of that, like, goth fantasy genre, right? Like, I like Quake tried to come back, it didn't really, but it had its place in the world and its time in the world, and that's past. So it's kind of wild to me they're still making more Devil May Cries, but if that's your cup of tea, like, that's your cup of tea. So that'll be out. Destiny 2 Beyond Light. I've seen a lot of memes about Destiny 2. And forgive me if I'm not like totally plugged into all these titles. I've actually, like I said, been busy these last few weeks somehow. And I haven't been as plugged into the news as I probably should be. But I know with Beyond Light, they're peeling away like some content to like make space for more content, but they're not exactly replacing it 1-to-1 to start. So all right, because they're I know Bungie announced like that Destiny Vault. Well, they'll move like different missions and stuff into so that no one can play them for a while, and then they'll probably release it as like new content and different waves. And hey, say what you will though, like the Destiny fan base, even though they're somewhat masochistic. Is that a word? They're masochists. If masochistic isn't a word, I think I like it. It's crispy. I like it. But they I don't know, they love that game, and I had my time with it too, and I every once in a while will jump back in for a day and be like, maybe I should start playing this again, and then I get into it, I'm like, I shouldn't play this again because it'll take my life up. It's, you know, those persistent worlds that those Skinner boxes, if you will, really keep you coming back. But I'm actually glad that there's space in the industry for Destiny 2. Like a grindy shooter like online that you can hang out with your buds, like I support it, you know. Then of course you got your racing games. We got Dirt 5. Man, I bought a steering wheel. I'm just so like, I'd love to play those games. I'm just so bad at them. Like I have a hard time even like getting into it. It's like a completely I've talked about like the language of games. Like, you know, when we pick up a controller, we know that typically the right trigger is going to be shoot, right? But if you hand it to someone who's never played games before, they might not intuitively know that. I don't have that yet for like driving games. I don't know how to feel like when I'm going around corners. Like I don't know how any of the action of the controls, even though the input's like a steering wheel and pedals, but it doesn't translate for me to say, like, it doesn't simulate the act of driving for me enough for there's still like a disconnect, you know, between me and the screen. So someday I'll probably end up buying it on sale when I'm buzzed with my buddies, because I think it'll be fun to play, and then I'll play it like 2 or 3 times. But Dirt 5's coming out. Of course, Fortnite is coming over. Godfall, Just Dance 2021. That'll be obviously next year. Oh, wait, that might be at some point this year. I hate the way they do cars, they do video games. It's always a year ahead of what it actually is because they're going to be selling it into the next year. It just frustrates me. We got your NBA games. You're gonna have your FIFAs. There's a Warhammer game, Watch Dogs Legion. I'm really interested to see what they do with Watch Dogs. You know, I feel like it was so hyped when it came out, and then it fell so flat. Like, but the potential was there, so they went forward with Watch Dogs 2, and like, there's like this weird arc that some titles have where it gets massively hyped up. It fails to meet expectations, but it still gives you a taste of like what it could be, just enough to like and it sells just well enough to warrant a sequel. And then with the sequel, because everyone feels somewhat burned with the original game, everyone lowers their expectations way down. They improve on a few of the criticisms from the first game, and it's like, you know what, maybe Watch Dogs isn't so bad, maybe it's not too bad. So with Legion, I'm really interested. Like, I feel like this third game has the potential to like, it's like the linchpin here. It's the keystone. Like, is Watch Dogs a good game? Is it worth pursuing further? Like, are they going to make more Watch Dogs? Are they going to do like more with Far Cry? Like, you look at Far Cry 3, like, I feel like that's where that game really exploded, even though Far Cry 1 and 2 are both really good. I would actually say 2 is one of the best games in the whole series. But that third game really like catapulted it to, household title for video games. So let's see. I'm really interested to see how good Watch Dogs Legion is when it comes out. And that'll be in 4K, 30 FPS actually. So I think it's gonna be on the previous consoles too, the previous generation. So I'm not too surprised it's 30 FPS. So yeah, that's a pretty hefty list of third-party games. The other thing that Sony announced recently is the PlayStation Plus collection, which seems like they're dipping their toe in the water to an Xbox Game Pass style subscription with the PlayStation Plus collection. Let me see if I can find that list. And it's a pretty large list of games that you get access to if you're a PS Plus member. And it really, I think it's a smart move at this point, because those of you who bought the games right away probably have bought the games right away, but when they're moving this many consoles and so many people are going to be on PlayStation, it's an opportunity to get these folks into different, to more of their properties and third-party partners, to drive sales for the future. So I'm really interested to see what downloads these get and how well it performs also, because I think we're headed towards a subscription war before long, because it's clear, and we'll go over it more during the Xbox podcast, but Xbox has positioned themselves, they've almost distanced themselves from consoles exclusively, and they're talking about games on a broader scale with PC and Game Pass and streaming, and honestly I think it's been a really killer strategy. But anyway, PlayStation Plus collection: Battlefield 1, Batman Arkham Knight, Bloodborne, which I'm sure a ton of people are happy to see, but I know everyone just wants a 60 FPS version. I know there's some dev constraints there, and it doesn't really make business sense for them to do it, because if they're making all these games backwards compatible, I don't know what the cost going in to make that update is, and if it actually earns them any money. So that's probably why they're not doing it. And I know like people hate to even address it, but if it doesn't make dollars and cents, it doesn't make business sense. So that's probably why. Days Gone, which I purchased actually just before my PS4 was stolen. So I actually really do want to try that game. That's like one of those solid 6.5, 7s I've heard. Like, it's just fun enough to drive you through the story that I'd love to give it a shot. Detroit Become Human, Fallout 4, Final Fantasy 15, God of War, which is massive, Infamous Second Son, which I think is often forgotten about. Like, I hope Infamous comes back, man. I think Second Son was that third game, and it was a launch title for the PS4. So like, you know, the limitations of a launch title, they haven't really pushed the hardware yet. It very much had that Ubisoft like blueprint all over it. So I don't think it quite reached the accolades to catapult it to household name. And then obviously Sucker Punch went on to work with Ghost of Tsushima. But I'm hopeful that Infamous makes a return on the PS5. It just makes sense, especially when you look at Last Light and what they did with the powers in Last Light with the 4K, with HDR. Like, they can really go places with Infamous, in my opinion. I don't know if they have much place to go story wise. Like I said, the story in the second Infamous, and more so in the second Infamous, kind of painted Infamous into a corner, but I'd love to see where it could go from a gameplay perspective and graphics perspective, at least. Monster Hunter World, Mortal Kombat 10, Persona 5, one of the most stylish and cool games I played last generation that I couldn't finish because it was just so damn tedious. Like, I just could not with all of the systems. But I suggest it to anyone who I think has the patience to play it, because I just think it's such a cool game. Ratchet and Clank, and obviously Ratchet and Clank is be coming out on PS5 as well. God, that's a good looking game. Also, too bad. Those are two really great games. There's a ton of great games on this list. So, I urge you, if you haven't played some of the games on this list and you're gonna have a PS5, like, jump on in. Resident Evil 7, the game that I infamously put a headset on to play in VR for like 2 seconds at my buddy's house on PSVR and took it off because like it's stressful, man. Horror in VR makes sense for anyone but me. The Last of Us Remastered, man, they've gotten so much mileage out of that. The Last Guardian, which no one thought would ever come out, and now here it is. Uncharted 4: Thieves End, one of the best games of the last generation, one of the best games I've ever played. Truthfully, it's one of the ones I can like go back to like once a year and just like be like, oh, I just want to experience it again. Really, 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 really great. And then lastly, one of my favorite party games of all time, Until Dawn. That's a pretty strong list for the PlayStation Plus collection. So while we might be a little dry, or Sony might be a little dry from a first party perspective, there's going to be a ton of stuff to play come launch window. If you're dedicated to playing every game that came out, maybe now's not the time to jump into PS5 because it's a lot of like remastered stuff. I'm hoping we get to a lot more original IP with the PS5 too. Like, I feel like this last generation really did remasters to death, and of course we're seeing it in movies. We're seeing it everywhere. Like, people love their properties now, and businesses are trading their IPs and selling their IPs and acquiring IPs, and they want to get their investment out of it. So we're kind of living in that world. But I really hope, and if there's a set of developers that I know or I trust to push some new ideas, you look at Horizon and you look at Ghost of Tsushima, like, hopefully Sony continues that trend of new IPs this generation. But anyway, let's talk about studios really quick. I think it's a good reminder. I actually only added this because of the Microsoft's acquisition of Bethesda, because I'd like to do a comparative list in the next podcast as well about the studios that each has under their umbrella. For Sony, we have Bend, who did Days Gone most recently. I listed a couple of recent games or games that they are going to be developing, just for your context. So we have Guerrilla Games, who obviously Horizon Zero Dawn, which I just mentioned, and also the Killzone franchise, which I'd love to see make a return. It's just so hard to enter like the massive shooter space, because you don't really buy shooters these days for their single player, at least first person shooters like your Killzones, and it's really like it's nigh impossible to unseat. You're just straight up not going to unseat Call of Duty. So it's about like carving your own audience out. So I'd love to see Killzone make a return, because they're always beautiful looking games as well. That, say what you will about them, but they really do push graphical fidelity to the forefront. Gameplay aside, sometimes I think the thing with Killzone for me is that it always felt, the aiming felt very clunky, or it always felt like I was turning and putting heavy. Does that make sense? I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but email if you do. breadradiolive@gmail.com. Then of course we have Insomniac Games, Ratchet and Clank, and obviously Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales. Man, Insomniac, what a great studio. Like, is there another studio that really like churns out, like, they're not attached just to one style? Like, Ratchet and Spider-Man are so different. They're both third person, like action or like adventure in their own way, but they're so stylistically different. I mean, you could look at Naughty Dog, but you look at Uncharted and you look at The Last of Us, they're really rooted in reality. Insomniac also did, what was that game they did on Xbox? Sunset Overdrive, another really great game with a great concept. Their Resistance, oh man, if Resistance Fall of Man or Resistance came back on the PS5, I would be so happy. That's one of those shooters that I think does have a space in the world with your Halos and your Call of Duties and your Killzones. And I guess even Overwatch, it's technically an FPS in its own way. They're all competing for the FPS players' time. Your Counter-Strikes and your Valorants, those are on PC though. But yeah, I just got pumped up there. I remember Resistance, and I feel the urge to play now. So I hope that comes back on the PS5. And then, of course, we got Japan Studio, who's working on the remake of Demon Souls, and they're doing Astro's Playroom. So they're actually responsible for 2 of the launch window items for the PS5. Media Molecule, Dreams, like, it's, I don't know how that thing's ever, it feels like they've been working on it for like 10 years, and maybe they have at this point. So I'm not sure how it becomes profitable, and like, I don't know what's the end game for Dreams. I don't know. And how do they incorporate PS5 tools? I know there's like a ton of, and does it ever come to PC? Like, is there going to be a tool, an editor in there? Like, what is the end game? Is it supposed to be like an amateur dev tool, kind of like I can't remember right now, but the mobile platform that people develop mobile games. I have to know. Anyway, I'll find it some other time. I don't want to take anyone's time up. Unity. There it is. I was just talking about Assassin's Creed. I couldn't remember Unity. So I'm like, are they trying to make Dreams like a sort of platform like Unity is for mobile games? I don't think, like, it's definitely not that complex, right? But seeing some of the stuff that folks are putting out, you're like, well, maybe it is. Really interested to see what's next for Media Molecule and what's next for Dreams. Naughty Dog, aforementioned Naughty Dog, The Last of Us, Uncharted. What's next for them, man? Is it really gonna be a whole... I know that they had a secondary team working on the new game, but how far along is that? Is it gonna be another 5 years, like 3 or 4 years before we see something from them? I hope not, because their games are just so damn good. And is it gonna be an original IP? Because the Uncharted story's over. The Last of Us is seemingly over. At least Ellie and Joel's story is over. Who knows if they I think that universe is still worth exploring, but I hope they take a break for it and come out with something new. I'd love to see something from Naughty Dog. Pixelopolis, which I think just works. They work on some smaller fry games. Sorry, anyone from Pixelopolis, if you're listening to this, but I didn't recognize anything they were working on. Polyphony of Gran Turismo fame. Obviously, Gran Turismo 7 will be coming out. Those games, I feel like they've looked the same forever. I'm sure there's a ton of differences in this day and age, but it's a simulator, man. It's one of those games like Dirt I'll probably pick up just because I want to show off how like slick it looks on whenever I can afford a TV on my PS5. But yeah, Polyphony. We got San Diego Studio, which is responsible for MLB The Show, and then a couple other games. I think like Kill Strain. Nothing like largely popular. Like MLB The Show is definitely where they're definitely like their wheelhouse. I wonder if they try and, you know, Bend used to do just like PSP, PS Vita games, and this was like their first big swing, their first big shot at a third-person action game. So I'm wondering if they do if San Diego is up next, and you know, maybe they stray away from MLB The Show and with a different team develop a new IP. We got San Mateo Studio, who's another like co-developer. They worked on Hellraisers. They worked on Spider-Man. They worked on Sly back in the day. They worked on Ratchet back in the day. Just seemingly a jack of all trades, and help where necessary. You expect, like, when in first-party studios, you have a couple of those role players. It's kind of what I do at my job, actually. Role player, just jump in, like, all right, yeah, cool. Where can I help? What do we do? What's the project? Let's go. But so yeah, you need someone like that on your team. Santa Monica, God of War, of course, and they announced most recently that the new God of War is coming, but I think it was just the music and an icon, which means we're talking years away. They're just using it as a hype machine right now. And last but not least, we've got Sucker Punch Productions, which is, as we said, Ghost of Tsushima, Infamous, and Sly Cooper. I'd love to see Sly Cooper come back. They've done they've done Crash. They brought back Ratchet. Like, I think it's time for Sly Cooper to come back. Anyway, whew, how you guys feeling? Great, me too. Let's talk about a few more items on the PS5. They obviously, well, maybe not obviously, Sony released a video of some of the UI elements. It's tooled for 4K TV. It features what they're calling cards. They're smaller icons than what's on the current PS4 interface. People make a lot of, like, we don't want a dog shit UI, right? Like, you don't want something like the weird tiles Xbox did with all like different advertisements, I guess, but it never really truly bothered me. Even when you go back to the PS3, the crossbar, I actually didn't mind the crossbar all too much. The PS4 didn't bother me. I don't care too much about aesthetic. I know there's going to be a ton of cool themes that come out, so we're going to make it look differently anyway. I do care about how it functions and how snappy it is. Like, I understand we're pushing these consoles to the max, to like getting all the processing power out of it that we can to run these games beautifully and reliably. But man, I hope they're reserving some power for the UI elements, because it doesn't ruin the experience, but it sours the experience so much when you're just trying to get around the menus, and it takes forever. Like, that's sometimes half the reason I don't play my PS4. Like, I just don't feel, I don't know, it just feels like a much more laborious task than it should be sometimes. There I am, ungrateful millennial. That's me. That's how I feel about it. But also on the UI, you can access like activities from the cards. I'm taking some text, I think, from Tech Radar here. It says it's a feature that can let you skip to different levels in a game instantly, which is kind of cool, like launching to different parts of the game. This is where the SSD comes in that we were talking about earlier. Like, we're really unlocking some like new ways to just like plug and play, plug and go. With the rest mode, the sleep mode being the most obvious step up in that capacity over the last few years, over the last generation at least. And I think something that's probably the most interesting thing to me, it's an exclusive PS Plus member feature, but it's called Game Help. And it provides like hints, videos, and that you can actually like put picture in picture on your screen for like tips. I think it tracks like how far along you are in a trophy. And I know I've never particularly been a huge trophy hunter, but for those of you out there, it seems like a really, really cool feature. Some of you may be like, if you're a purist, you're like, I don't want any tips or tricks. I'm going to find this myself. But for those of you who are purely in it for the numbers game, it seems like a very cool feature. So you don't have your phone or your laptop or anything else up to look for a guide. I'm just really interested to see like how well supported it is. Like, is it all going to be provided by the dev? Like, are they going to source videos from YouTube sometimes? Like, how do they filter that content? The other thing, like, there have been a ton of very cool features that haven't been utilized. Like, you look at the touch bar on the PS4 controller, and like folks were using it all sorts of different ways at launch, and then at the end it became basically a giant start button or something you'd swipe to bring your map up. So like, does Game Help start out like as a very cool supported feature because devs are forced to use it early on, and then they decide like it's cutting into their margin to have a team dedicated to developing all these Game Help functions? Who knows? But for now, I think we'll look at the optimistic side of it and say it's a very cool feature. I'm excited to see how well supported it is. And then there's also some like additional something they're calling Explore, which amalgamates, again, I'm taking this from Tech Radar, amalgamates your games into one place, as well as news about games you're following, community-related media. They're really pushing, like Xbox and Sony especially has been pushing like community features all over their console. I guess I won't speak for Microsoft. I didn't have an Xbox last generation. I'm looking to get one this generation. But they're really pushed the social aspects of their system, like connecting to Twitter and share. I see people interact with it on Twitter here and there with the nice hashtag PS4 share, but I've never really been plugged into any, like, the absolute most I would do is probably share my PS4. I have no desire to link my socials to like my gaming platforms or to the point of UI. Like I have no desire to look and source news for my PS4 when I could do it much quicker on my computer or on my television through another streaming service. It's just not something that's ever appealed to me. But for those of you out there, I'm sure there's some of you, there must be some people, there must be a lot of people interacting with this for them to keep pushing the social aspect. Well, every company has some social aspect that they push because it makes money and brand exposure or whatever. But if that's for you, great, it'll be there. And then last but not least, the PlayStation Store is more integrated into the UI. Great, easier to buy things. I always thought the store interface was horrible to get around anyway, so this actually might be a positive for me and a negative for your wallet. Also at launch, obviously they have the headsets coming out, more controllers, a media remote, which is another one of those things that's like, oh yeah, I guess they're required basically to come out with one of these, but I don't know how many people are going to use this as their sole media source when you've got like Fire Sticks and Rokus floating around. But again, maybe I'm also out of touch, and feel free to tell me I am. And lastly, the camera, which incidentally, like PSVR support is going to be on the PS5, but you have to use like a PS4 camera. And I can't believe they're still using those wands from the PlayStation Move. Maybe say it like, I wonder if we ever see a PSVR 2 for the PS5. But yeah, if the camera doesn't have, just like I was saying with Game Help, it feels like there are always a couple games that come out that are gimmicky, basically that seem like they were made just to move units of the camera, and then it usually halfway through the cycle they announce that they're no longer supporting, the device. But if that's something you're into, or for those of you who stream directly from your console, that's probably more so what they're aiming for. That's going to be out there for you. So wow, that's a lot of information. Let's talk about like how do we feel on the whole on Bread Radio here, and by we I mean me, about the PS5 launch. I think obviously we had this weird Cold War between Xbox and PlayStation about pricing, which actually I at the end of the day, I don't think it was about pricing. It was about their SKUs. Like you look at Sony, and they opted for disk drive and non-disk drive, and then you look at Xbox, and they opted for powerful, less powerful. So one, and they have a much broader price gap. Sony's is only $100, because it just seems the digital version just has the absence of a disk drive. I will be getting the disc version because of backwards compatibility, and I have some Blu-rays as well that I'd love to be able to still watch someday whenever I do that, which is pretty much almost never, but still nice having the option. With Xbox, you're looking at like a $200 or $150 difference. We'll go over it more in the next cast. But obviously it's a much, I don't want to say much weaker system, but it's a underpowered system compared to the main SKU. So it wasn't like, while those prices are different, it was more about not showing their hand as far as like the hardware they were going to be releasing. I think that's what it became more of. And also release date. It's crazy how much all the thought and analysis that must go into release date. It must be insane. Like the logistics teams, the operations teams, like it must be the most, I think about it all the time, must be the most complicated and stressful like project to work on. I don't envy those teams, but the wave of relief they feel on launch day must be like, you could probably cut it with a knife. Anyway, back to Outlook. The system's really powerful. Watching enough videos out there that the architecture seems, I know I'm really interested to see how these custom SSDs work. Like the SSDs, again, I think are going to be the biggest leap in as far as like console gaming tech goes. The liquid metal like heat sink and processor, like I'm really interested to see like how much heat does this thing actually throw off? How loud is it? Because truthfully, I think I was lying to myself initially, like, yeah, I think it's pretty cool, but I think the PS5 is ugly, man. I think it's really ugly. I would much rather have that giant rectangle that Xbox has, because it just looks like any other, like it looks like a giant Alexa speaker, I guess. I get it's for like the ergonomics are there for airflow. So Mark Cerny's an incredibly sharp dude. I don't doubt that it's going to run well, but I wish there was like an all black version or something I could just like hide, or maybe someday I'll be able to remove those fins and put something else on there, but it just doesn't fit in with I don't like laying on its side. It's got this weird screw. It's very asymmetrical. It's symmetrical and asymmetrical at the same time. You can fold it hot dog style, but not hamburger style, if that makes sense. And with a disk drive, it just looks like this growth on the side of the console. So if the aesthetics are you, maybe this isn't. If you're all about aesthetics, I mean, maybe this isn't the console for you. But it's slightly less powerful, like I was saying, but if there's anything I trust Sony on, it's their first party titles. God of War, your Horizons, your Ghost of Tsushima. They seem to have built a really solid stable of first party developers. Now going to be challenged by Microsoft's first party developers. We'll review that again next cast. But we're entering a really interesting like time in these consoles wars, especially with the acquisition of Bethesda by Microsoft. My only other takeaways for Sony is you saw what happened with the PS3, right? Sony, I'm just wondering if history is starting to repeat itself. And you look at the PS2, and obviously I think it's one of the best selling consoles of all time, if not the best selling console of all time. It's really everywhere, right? And it was sold surprisingly long, like way longer than I ever thought it would be. I actually have two at my house, like up here behind me. It's great. But when the PS3 released, like I already said, the infamous $599.99, the totally weird, I guess I'll call it weird, architecture of the PlayStation with its like 6 processors. While it was like really powerful tech for the time, it was like notoriously hard to develop for, and they spent like the first part of that generation basically just trying to earn back consumer trust, trying to like make their tools better for their developers. And like I think at the end of the day the PS3 maybe outsold Xbox, but it's still not that impressive considering the worldwide hold that Sony has on the console market. Talking strictly between Xbox and PlayStation, because somehow Nintendo managed to carve their own. We'll talk about Nintendo some other time, but man, everything about Nintendo, the way it works is wild to me, and it's like they've trained everyone to just be like, well, that's just the Nintendo way, you know. But my point is, when we look at the PS4, like we were looking at a more humbled Sony and PlayStation team, and they were still working on getting back. It's exactly what we talked about with like the Watch Dogs release. Like everyone felt like maybe like a little bit slightly burned, other than like the biggest fanboys, about like how the beginning of the PS3 era went. So they really doubled down that like we're gonna make this so easy and so much better for the consumer. And Xbox obviously flubbed their launch with the whole like DRM, Sony capitalizing on like how you share your games by just handing it to your buddy. Towards the middle of this generation, like obviously leadership changes, but we're looking at some business decisions that kind of point towards a Sony heading in the direction of the PS3 again, rather than the strong start of the PS4. And I'm just talking about like things that I consider like to be a little anti-consumer. Some actions, like we talked about the Spider-Man upgrade for the PS5. You can only get Spider-Man Remastered by buying the Ultimate Edition of the add-on or the like stepping stone to Spider-Man 2, and it's just really complicated, weird messaging that's obviously to drive sales of Miles Morales, which I am a Spider-Man fanboy, so boom, got me, I guess. But we look at all the cross-play messaging over this last few years with Minecraft, Rocket League. I think it's still on PS4 and PC only, and no Xbox. And I mean, it's easy to say, like, from a business perspective, like, why would Sony ever play ball with Microsoft if they don't have to? It doesn't make business sense for them because they're trying to make a closed environment for their games. It's weird that we give that longer leash to Nintendo, where they're just like, screw you guys, whatever. But they recently said that they're going to have a higher price for their first party games. $70. We look at the mod fiasco from years back with Bethesda, where they didn't want to approve like some of the paid mod content aside. We'll say like that. So what Bethesda tried to do seemed a little crazy at the time, but Sony's still unwilling to play ball with the mods with Bethesda, where Xbox was making them available. No EA access initially, and raising the price of PlayStation Plus without like adding any new like huge features to PlayStation Plus. They just like made it more expensive. I look forward to the next generation, but we're looking at a trend in business practices that seem to be trending against where we were hoping Sony would head, and especially at the beginning of the PS4 PS4's generation. So I guess I would say that my expectations for the upcoming generation, I think this is just how I feel about life generally. I'm like optimistic, maybe stupidly so. So I'm very hopeful for the future, but I know that in the past we've been punched in the mouth. So I'm hesitant to just fully like believe. But I think competition obviously is very healthy. I think Xbox is doing a lot of, like, you looked at all the change that Xbox basically had to drive and Microsoft had to drive in response to Sony. So we'll see if any of that reaps the rewards for Xbox and the Microsoft team, and then Sony obviously needs to. I feel like crossplay is just the right thing to do at this day and age. So we'll see if any of that changes with the next cycle. Anyway, that's my review, and I'm sticking to it. Really excited for the launch. Like, really excited. I'm actually thinking about taking the day off. Which I'm like really happy to have the privilege of doing, but I don't know, man. Like, people are so like anti-hype these days sometimes. Like, and I'll admit I am too, but it just feels good to be excited about something this year. So I'm really pumped for the PS5's launch. I'm also really stoked for Xbox as well. I'd love to get my hands on one. I canceled my initial pre-order just because it didn't feel like the responsible time while I was trying to like sell my car, and we have Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up as well, so want to make sure I just have some extra like spending freedom so I can get some things for my loved ones, of course. I don't even remember what my point was. It's been a long day, guys. It's been a very long day. But what's next on the show? Next week we're going to talk about Xbox. That'll be recorded Thursday and probably posted on Friday or Saturday of next week. Definitely gonna be turtling a bunch over these next couple of weeks just to save some money ahead of aforementioned holidays. So I really want to sit down and grind out some like Ghost of Tsushima and actually finish that game, because that's what I was playing when my PS4 was initially stolen. So I'd really like to see what else that game has to offer. Plus they pushed out like a new co-op update. It's kind of weird. It's almost, I was looking at some tweets from Sucker Punch, and they're like, yeah, new updates to the updates, and it seems like they're gonna like support this thing, and like they're almost trying to extend the life on it. I don't know. It's kind of wild. I wonder if they like package some stuff together for the PS5 and do some sort of re-release, or I don't know how the backwards compatibility is going to work with it. But that seemed to be the backwards compatibility piece with the PS5 looked to be much more of a non-story or a non-starter than it was initially, because again, their language around backwards compatibility was like really cryptic. Like, Sony's been way more cryptic than they have in a few years past. But the next show, we're going to cover the Xbox. We're going to go over the specs. We'll go over the first party games, like what you can play day one. We won't say everything on Xbox Game Pass like we did with the PlayStation Plus. What's it called? PlayStation Plus Collection, because Game Pass is like starting to seem like the best deal in gaming. I think it might already be the best deal in gaming right now, but we'll go over some of Game Pass and other Xbox's offerings, the specs, the UI, any of the extra hardware that's going to be coming out, and then we'll kind of just like review what's to come this generation. So all right, well, that's going to do it for the show today. Thank you so much for joining me here on Bread Radio. Again, you can email the show at breadradiolive@gmail.com, or you can purchase some merch on breadradio.live. Really appreciate any support you can offer the show. Tell your friends, tell anyone who likes listening to podcasts, send a suggestion in. I'm not above criticism. I'm definitely not an expert in anything, but I'm always looking to learn. So I'm hopeful that we can keep learning about games together. As always, be cool to one another, and we'll see you next week.